First, though, to the long fight to reclaim stolen wages. It's affected tens of thousands of Indigenous people across Australia. Each state had its own government department to administer the finances of Aboriginal workers who weren't considered responsible enough to manage their own money. Queensland alone is said to owe $500 million in unpaid wages. In 2002, $55 million was offered in compensation, and in May this year, a further fund of $21 million was set up. It's estimated that the New South Wales government separately also owes about $70 million to Indigenous workers. Now, Western Australia is facing a legal challenge over its compensation payout for unpaid wages, which, if successful, could set a national precedent. Between 1905 and 1972, the government withheld up to 3/4 of the money earned by workers on state-run native welfare settlements. Instead of being dispersed, the money ended up in state coffers and the financial records vanished. In 2012, the WA government made a one-off payment of $2,000 to a select group of former Aboriginal pastoral workers. But as Lateline's Ginny Stein reports, that's been rejected by many as an insult. And a warning to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers, this story does contain images of people who are deceased.
Josie Farah MP is home.
Hey! Yeah. Good to see you, Mum. Yeah.
These women are her mothers, her aunties. She's happy to see them, but she's angry with the state government and the little compensation it's paid.
Am I worth that? You know, for the years that I put in working, for the years I had to look after my kids, for the years I had to do all the manual stuff.
What binds them is their past lives on the Native Welfare Department-run Mullabulla station and the government's paltry compensation payout of $2,000 for a lifetime of stolen wages for work on the station.
As family, we should go walk about ourselves. Our grandfathers should take us. And mothers. Their mothers not afford it.
Now they're part of a legal challenge against the West Australian government to reclaim unpaid wages.
Many people worked a lifetime for near to nothing, and then to get $2,000 was just disgusting. We felt hurt and disgusted, and it's probably one of the reasons that's driving us today is that that mean and paltry amount of money was nothing compared to the work that and the effort that Aboriginal people put into building a great state like Western Australia.
We work and our guts off, fortnight pays, and that still doesn't meet. So imagine these, my mum and them here and auntie and them, you know, $2,000. After they more or less built this place for us to live and survive and go for the future for our children.
The state government declined to be interviewed on what it says is a complex case, but in response provided this statement.
Stolen wages was a complex matter in Western Australia due to the lack of surviving records and the passing of time, but the state government's response aimed to balance the claims of those affected against the contemporary needs of Aboriginal Western Australians.
Today, Australia is marketing live cattle from the Kimberley to Asian countries, live cattle. If it weren't for these Aboriginal people and the number of Aboriginal people that worked on these cattle stations, the lone pastoralist wouldn't have got to where he is today.
At Kunji Park, now an Aboriginal family-run cattle property in West Australia's far north, the past and present collide. Oscar Yanergy spent a lifetime as a stockman working on neighbouring Mullabulla station.
You were doing all stock work?
Yeah.
Mainly stock work you were doing. Fencing?
Yeah, fencing.
Yard building. Ah, yeah.
Oscar Yanergy does not know how old he is. His birth was never recorded, but he does know what he was paid for a lifetime of work. First nothing, then a little, but not in money, in food rations.
What about in the proper early days when flour and
sugar?
Sugar and
That's
tea?
all, yeah.
Eh?
That's all.
You remember them days?
Yeah, and corned beef.
Sugar and tea, bit of corned beef.
Yeah.
Mullabulla is remembered for its brutal punishments and its strict controls.
I was working just for the bag of flour and meat, you know. That's all I got.
But it's also spoken about with a sense of affection and loss.
He's a horse breaker. He's breaking all the horses for the station.
Jane Butters remembers the day she arrived at Mullabulla. She had been snatched from her mother. She was 6 years old.
Well, this is a story about Mullabulla where I grew up. And we used to do our work in the morning, you know, at Mullabulla. Get up about 5 o'clock, go to the goat yard, get our milk, put the beds out before sun up.
The settlement was one of a number run by the West Australian government for children of mixed blood, labelled back then as half-castes.
You know, when I first went there was more half-caste kids than white men and black people, you know. I didn't think there was so many half-caste people, you know.
Now in her 80s, Jane Butters' life of unpaid or underpaid work and of government control is plainly laid out in her welfare file.
So Jane, with this letter here, which is from Mr Macbeth, from the Department of Native Affairs, it says, Jane was under my direct control from April 1949 until May 1952.
Lawyer Judy Harrison has been documenting the cases of hundreds of claimants.
So some people might have spent their entire working lives without receiving any income, and the Western Australian government gave them $2,000. So Aboriginal people in general felt insulted and demeaned by the government taking that position.
I should be paid for all the work I've done, you know, every day, not just whatever. I worked hard, I deserved the money. I didn't complain, you know, I did it.
A legal challenge to the state government's limited compensation offer is now being prepared.
We've been pursuing this matter even since before the payment was made, and we'll continue to do so until these people get proper reparation for the work that they did.
For the Indigenous stockmen and women and young boys and girls who helped build Australia's pastoral industry but were never paid for their years of work, the fight is far from over. But finding an equitable solution requires political will, something which has been historically lacking. The day the government sold Mullabulla Station in 1955, Aboriginal workers and their families were forcibly removed and scattered. Josie Farah was just 1 year old. To survive, she and her family moved to another property.
I worked from when I was about 14 years old. That work was milking the goats in the mornings to make sure there was fresh milk and cream on the table for our white or European bosses. And then later when I got married, I worked on a number of stations with my husband. He worked as a horse breaker, and I used to do a lot of sewing for the white managers and their families.
Were you paid for that?
No, we weren't paid for it. I wasn't paid for it.
For Josie Farah, this is a very personal battle. There's no doubt she wants compensation for unpaid wages for an increasingly ageing group of claimants. But she also believes constitutional recognition is paramount. Only then will true and meaningful reconciliation be possible.
It's been proven we are the first people of this country, and this Parliament should be recognising us as the first people of this state in this country they call Western Australia. That's part of the bigger picture of Australia. That we should be treated as people.
In Queensland, the Labor government has announced a round of consultations with Indigenous communities about stolen wages. Compensation is expected to start early next year. One of the people behind the campaign for justice in that state has been federal MP Bob Katter. 2 years ago, his Katter's Australian Party called on the former Newman government to pay more than $20 million to Indigenous Queenslanders for unpaid wages. Bob Katter spoke to us a short time ago from his home in Charters Towers in far north Queensland. We're now hearing that some Aboriginal people spent their entire working lives receiving no income at all. It certainly sounds like state-sanctioned slavery. Is that how you see it?
Oh, it might be a bit of an overcall to go that far, but the money went into a community fund, and people have often asked me about this. There would have been no way that that community fund money, all of it would have tracked its way back to the people that were entitled to it. I must say that I'm not familiar with anyone that worked for nothing, but the wages were very, very low. And there was some logic attached to that, insofar as less wages, more people that could go and have employment. But I took the position, and the government took the position, ultimately, that we had to go to award wages. So you had three separate issues there. The claim that people had actually worked for nothing. Secondly, the fact that they'd worked and the money had gone to community fund and hadn't ended up in the pockets of they or their heirs. And the third issue was that they weren't paid what they should have been paid. So there's three separate issues there, and the courts have got will have some big headaches in untangling those problems.
Do you have any idea of the scale of this practice? How many people today are owed money and the quantum of the money involved?
No, I couldn't answer either of those questions, but I think that the department I was responsible for when I took over had about 2,500 employees. Now, I deeply regret to say that the vast bulk of those were white fellas, not black fellas. Now, one of my first tasks was to not terminate anyone's employment. We never sacked anyone, but to replace those people, a policy of non-replacement, and within 3 or 4 years, we had substantially all of those people being first Australians. But there still would have been something like, I would say, 700, 800, at least maybe 1,000 people that were fitting into this category of supposedly employed, but really whether they were employed or not is a question mark. They may have been receiving some payments, but what those payments were and whether they bore any resemblance to a proper wage, that's not a question I could answer, but I would have serious doubts as to whether it would be answered in a positive way.
What should justice look like for these people?
Well, I am firmly fixed on the justice that we need today. These people can just abandon all these communities, and the Prime Minister, in not one of his finest moments, said that's what should happen. Well, there'd be no one living in Australia outside of the Golden Boomerang, the narrow coastal belt. There's simply no one living there. If you take away the first Australians, there's just simply nobody living there. And if you think you can hold on to an empty land, you believe in the tooth fairy. Now, it is very good for this country that these people occupy these areas. We want to back them up. And if we have to twist things around so that they get repayment for wages they weren't paid in the past, that to me is a very good thing. I would infinitely far prefer to give them the machinery they need to walk into the 21st century on an equal with everybody else in Australian society. I go there and there's a big sign saying, if you come here and you bring alcohol, we'll throw you in jail for 2 years. Oh, welcome to Mornington Island. And when you get there, you find out that everyone on the council is someone dying of diabetes. Is this something to be proud of as a nation?
Given there is so little evidence left to back their individual claims, how do you best calculate today what each person is actually owed?
Therein lies the problem. And, over the years, there's been many times this battle has been fought. And I have said and put on public record on numerous occasions that I believe at the very least, there was no way that those wages that were paid into the community fund, and then the first Australian had to turn up and give reasons why he could get his own pay. So a lot of them just didn't end up getting paid. And in those days, there were some very bad attitudes amongst some police, and it was the police that administered those funds. So I don't think that, there was any way in the world all that money was finding its way back to the people that were entitled to it. Now, there'd have to be some sort of generalisation as far as paying the money back goes. But as I say, I wish I wasn't concentrating on looking into the past and the rights and wrongs of the past. I wish I was spending my time presenting the machinery which we need as First Australians to move into the future.
What did you think of Western Australia's response, the blanket $2,000 payment per person?
Well, I suppose $2,000 is better than no dollars at all. But I didn't think it came close to a serious effort to try and come to grips with the problem. But then again, I mean, I've got to say in all honesty, I wouldn't like to be in a position of power and working my way through this, nor would I like to be the courts trying to work my way through this. But if you're saying that there was injustices done, in my mind, there was no doubt that that was the situation.
Has the reluctance to pay claimants been driven up till now by the economics of the matter or something else?
Look, I just don't think there's any real genuine concern for the First Australians. It amazes me that people who you would think would have a sympathetic attitude, and I mean, I just keep going back to the issue of title deeds. You must understand that the only people that I know of on earth, that are not allowed to own their own home are the First Australians living in First Australian lands. There is no such thing as a title deed for them. And if there is, it is so ridiculously complex and takes such a long time frame that in reality it can't happen, and it hasn't happened. And yet it's not hard to do. I think we issued nearly 800 title deeds in the last, near enough to 800 anyway, in the last 4 or 5 years of the regime when I was the minister. We had the issue of the back payments then, and I said that I thought that there was a case to answer in the courts, and I most certainly feel that the case should have been taken to the courts. I was not in a position with a matter that, in my opinion, was sub judice to take initiatives, but I most certainly would have strongly backed the people in those initiatives if they had taken them then.
Are you suggesting that somehow these people be given land as settlement of their claims?
No. Look, First Australians, in theory, are the richest, most land-rich people on earth. They own 23% of a continent almost the size of the United States, almost the size of Brazil, not all that much smaller than China. They own 23% of the continent. And the part that they own, in the main, is the high rainfall area. They should be the richest people on earth, but they can't get a title deed. And hence my assertion that the people in power just don't give a damn about them. At the end of the day, they just don't give a damn. And that is just as true of the ALP as it is of the LNP. And I single out Mal Brough because outside of myself, he's the only person that made a real, serious, determined effort to try and give the people real ownership of the land. They have a make-believe ownership. It's in the nature of some sort of national park. Oh, that's nice, you can run around in a national park. You're not allowed to own anything there or take any of the trees or any moo cows there. But oh geez, isn't that nice that you're sort of are supposed to own this national park? It is cruel beyond belief, and it is going to reach the world stage eventually. And I would just plead with the leaders of the country to realise that act now or go into a situation which will become increasingly more ugly as world attention is drawn to what is going on here.
Bob Catter, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.